Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos daf Kuf Lamed Hey can be divided into two even halves. The first half discusses the machlokas which we saw in the Mishnah about a child who it is unclear whether or not he requires a bris milah and whether you're allowed to do that bris milah on Shabbos. That's going to be a discussion about what the case of uncertainty is. We'll discuss that, and then we'll discuss a child who's born with an already bris milah situation, whether or not he requires a milah or he does not require a further milah if he's born already circumcised. And then the second half of the daf will be about a statement that the obligation to do a bris milah on the 8th day, as opposed to earlier, only falls on a situation where the mother was subject to tumas yoledes, the tumah that falls on a woman when she gives birth. So we'll discuss that situation at length. So first of all, the Gemara quotes the Mishnah. In our Mishnah we had seen it was a machlokas about a suffix and an androgynous. Now a suffix the Gemara defines as a child who was born either in the 7th month or in the 8th month of the pregnancy. We're not sure which. And the Gemara spells out, this is skipping forward a bit, but it spells out that if a child is born in the 8th month, it's not viable. It's certainly not going to live very long. This was the situation in the days of Chazal. An 8th month pregnancy could not survive. It was considered to be not alive already, and the child was even considered muktzah. So you were not allowed to do the bris milah on Shabbos. It was a bris milah as if it was performed already on a stillborn, which we do that bris milah, but we don't prepare for it, at least on Shabbos. We'll see that in the next daf. And as a matter of fact, the mother is not even allowed to nurse the baby. She's allowed to nurse the baby to relieve the pressure on herself, or some machlokas rishonim. Possibly she's even allowed to save the life of the baby as long as she can. But the baby is considered mukta, so she has to lean over and nurse it without holding it on Shabbos. So it's a very sad and precarious situation for a child that's born in the 8th month. And you would not do that bris milah on Shabbos for sure. The question is, if you're not sure if this child's birth was in the 8th month or the 7th month, you're allowed to do bris milah on Shabbos because it may or may not be obligated to have a real bris milah or not. So the Gemara says that's a suffix, and that is one of the cases where our Mishnah quoted the Tanna Kama that you do not do that bris milah on Shabbos. And the other one is an androgynous. That is from the word androgynous, which means somebody who's a hermaphrodite, somebody who has both male and female identifying organs. Now, the Gemara quotes a brisa says, how do you know these two halachos? So the Gemara says from the word arlasai. It says, on the 8th day you should circumcise his foreskin. It's his, only his, to exclude somebody who's a suffix. Someone who's one of these two. Anyway, this is the opinion of the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says no, an androgynous definitely has a male organ, and therefore he or she has a real obligation to have a real bris milah, and if they don't have one, then there is kares involved. So it certainly can be done on Shabbos. The two things that are excluded from the word orlasai, somebody who's born in twilight on Friday afternoon or on Shabbos afternoon. So we don't know if they were born on Shabbos, therefore we don't know if their 8th day falls on Shabbos or not. Therefore you couldn't possibly do their bris on Shabbos. You'd have to wait until after Shabbos. That's one that's excluded. The other one that's excluded is a neilad mahal, somebody who's born circumcised. He's born without a foreskin. Okay, now the Gemara presents the sugya, the discussion of a child born without a foreskin. So the Gemara, first of all, has a machlokas in a brisa between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and it's not immediately clear what exactly the case of this machlokas is. One thing we know, Beis Shammai says you do have to draw some blood, and Beis Hillel says you don't have to draw any blood. What is this machlokas about? So the first version we understand is that this is referring to a child who's born circumcised. That's the Tanna Kama's understanding. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says no, that's not the discussion there. In a case like that, everybody agrees that no milah happened over here, and you definitely have to draw blood. What's the reason? He's already circumcised. What's the point in drawing the blood? So the Gemara explains that we are concerned, or possibly certain, that there is a foreskin. It's just that the foreskin is fused into the flesh of the head of the organ, and therefore you cannot actually see the foreskin, but it's there, and therefore you have to do something. You have to draw blood at least. Now, as we shall see later, that would be the reasoning of the one who says you do have to draw blood, but it's not clear if he's concerned that may be the situation or he's certain that that's the situation. Okay, but anyway, the first version of this machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and for sure Beis Shammai is the one who says you do have to draw. So the first understanding is that it's the case of a child who's born circumcised. Now Rav Shimon ben Elazar says no, that's not the machlokes. In the case of a child who's born circumcised, everybody agrees you have to draw blood. The machlokes is in a case of a person who converted to Judaism when he was already circumcised. So he definitely doesn't have a foreskin. There's no mystery as to what happened to his foreskin. He had it surgically removed, but that was not a bris milah because that happened when he was still a non-Jew. The question is, does he have to draw blood or not? And on that, Beis Shammai says he does. He has to do something to get into the bris, and Beis Hillel says he does not have to because he definitely had a circumcision before. Okay, now what comes out? What is the machlokes between these two opinions? According to the Tanna Kama, Beis Hillel, who is going to be the halacha, agrees. Beis Hillel holds that a child who's born in circumstances does not have to do anything. According to the second version, Beis Hillel holds that a child who's born circumcised does have to draw blood. And this, how do we pass it? Is going to be a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, we pass like the Tanna Kama, and therefore he does not have to draw blood, a child who's born circumcised. And according to Shmuel, he does have to draw blood, even though he was born circumcised. So the Gemara says that was the situation that happened with Rav Ada bar Ava. He had a child who was born circumcised, and he wanted to hold like Shmuel, and he tried to find a moil who would do the bris for him, who would draw blood. And the 8th day came out on Shabbos, so he ran around and he went to 13 moilim, and nobody was willing to do it. He ended up doing it himself, and because he was not an expert moil, a terrible thing happened, and he injured the child. He caused him to be a krus shafcha. So Gemara says that he was upset, and he said, it's my fault because I should have listened to Rav. Why did I insist on listening to Shmuel? I should have listened to Rav. So the Gemara said, Rav Nachman said to him, you didn't do like Shmuel either. Rav and Shmuel were only discussing whether you have to draw blood during the week. Drawing blood on Shabbos, certainly there's no reason to draw blood on Shabbos. It's for sure not, you aren't allowed to be mechalel Shabbos for a situation like this where you don't even know if he needs a meal or not. So Gemara says, yeah, but Rav Ada bar Ava held like Rav Yosef, who says that a situation where we say they have to draw blood is because we are convinced that there is a foreskin, but it's fused to the head of the organ. It's not that there is no foreskin at all; it was already removed or never formed. The Gemara says, how does Rav Yosef know that that is the situation? Rav Yosef now presents his source. Where do we see somebody who says that you definitely are allowed to draw blood? You have to draw blood even on Shabbos, and that's the halacha. So we're going to have to find a place where Beis Hillel actually says that. So Rav Yosef brings a brisa which quotes Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor. Now he's not going to be Rav Yosef's source, but based on what he says, we're going to try to figure out what the Tanna Kama that he's arguing on says, and that is going to be Rav Yosef's source. Now what does Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor says? He says the following thing. He says this machlok is between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, where Beis Hillel says you don't draw blood, and Beis Shammai says you do draw blood. Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor says that machlok is on Shabbos. But during the week, both agree that you do draw blood. Machlokes is only on Shabbos. So Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor says, so Beis Hillel says, according to this, that you don't draw blood. That doesn't help me. He says on Shabbos you don't draw blood, but the Tanna Kama, who Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor is arguing, must have held on a Shabbos. There's no machlokes. Everybody agrees you do draw blood. There you see that Beis Hillel says you do draw blood. It must be that it's definitely a situation where there is a foreskin fused and you have to draw blood. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. How do you know that everybody agrees that on Shabbos you do draw blood? Maybe the Tanna Kama held that everybody agrees on Shabbos you do not draw blood. So Rabbi Yosef answered that can't be. If the Tanna Kama held that everybody agrees on Shabbos you do not draw blood, and Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor came along and he said, no, on Shabbos there is still a machlokes, that means he's telling you that Beis Shammai says you do draw blood. That's what he's changing from the Tanna Kama. Who cares what Beis Shammai holds? We don't pass like Beis Shammai. It must be that that's not what was happening. It must be that what was happening is that the Tanna Kama was saying that everybody agrees you do draw blood. And he's coming to say, no, Beis Hillel argues, and Beis Hillel says you do not draw blood. So the Gemara says, no. Maybe what was happening was that the Tanna Kama had said the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel was during the week. Everybody says on Shabbos you do draw blood. And during the week, the Tanna Kama held where there's a machlokes. Beis Hillel says you don't draw blood even during the week. And on that, Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor comes in and he says, no, during the week Beis Shammai says you have to draw blood. Beis Hillel agrees you have to draw blood. He's arguing as to what Beis Hillel says. And therefore, it's very important for us to know that. What happens on Shabbos? On that, the Tanna Kama, what he said, it could be that he said that everybody agrees that you don't draw blood at all on Shabbos. There's no machlokes. You do not have a proof that's what the Tanna Kama held, and that's what Rabbi Elazar Kappa is arguing, because again, it could be that the Tanna Kama had held that there was a machlokes during the week, and Rabbi Elazar Kappa is coming to say, no, that machlokes was on Shabbos. Okay, that ends that discussion. Now we begin a new subject, which is the statement of Rav Asi. Rav Asi says there is a link between the mother having tumas yoledes, a state of impurity that comes from giving birth, and the obligation to do a bris on the 8th day. Why is there a link? Because the pasuk says, "Isha ki zachar when a woman has a male child and she is tamei, and later it says, "V'mashmi imol b'sar," say that he has to have the bris on the 8th day. If she's for whatever reason does not have tumas leda, there's not going to be a bris on the 8th day. It could be possibly earlier, possibly later, depending on the situation. Now the Gemara is going to find a number of situations where the mother is not tamei, and the Gemara will try to prove that the baby needs a bris on the 8th day anyway. So the first proof is from Abaye. Abaye says, look at all the people before the Torah was given. Before Har Sinai, Avram Avinu, and all the generations afterwards, they all had brisin on the 8th day, and there was no Tumah, because the whole halacha of Tumah hadn't begun yet. So the Gemara says, yeah, of course not. That's because there was no halacha of Tumah, but once the halacha of Tumah was given, then this link is established. So from thenceforth on, you can't prove from before then. From thenceforth on, this link is established. If there's no Tumah, there's no requirement for the 8th day for the bris. Okay, the Gemara has another question. We have a brisa that says somebody who has 2 arlas, 2 foreskins, 2 layers, or that we're not going to focus on, or if he was born by cesarean section. So born by cesarean section does not necessarily have tumas leda. There is no tumah for the birth. Yet it says that of Chia bar Rav as a machlokes with Rav Huna as to whether or not you could be Mechalel Shabbos to do the bris. So Gemara says, one second, the whole machlokes is about whether or not you could be Mechal Shabbos, but doing the bris on the right time, that for sure you have to do. If it's a weekday, certainly you could do the bris on the 8th day. So you see that even though the mother has no tumas leda because it's a cesarean section, still you do the bris on the 8th day. So Gemara says, no, actually not. If there is a very strong link, if you're not Mechal Shabbos for him, you would need to do the bris on the 8th day. Those two halachas go together; they're dependent on each other. A child that needs the bris on the 8th day, you're Mechal Shabbos for. A child which you can't be Mechal Shabbos to do his bris, you don't have to do the bris on the 8th day. Okay, now the Gemara has a different type of proof. The Gemara wants to prove that this is actually a subject of a machlokes tanaim. We're going to bring a lengthy Mishnah or brisa, and it's a totally different subject. But based on that brisa, we will conclude that there is a machlokes tanaim as to whether or not Rav Asi is right, whether there is a link between tumah or not. This brisa is discussing when a mother and or her child converts to Judaism. When does the bris have to be? So the pasuk that specifically discusses referring to type of conversion, which happens when you purchase a maid servant. So the halacha is as follows. We discuss something called Yelid Bayis. That's a child of a servant born in your household. And we discuss something called the Miknas Kesef, which is when you bought the child itself. And the Pesukim seem to divide it up into 2. There is a Yelid Bayis who has a bris on the 8th day, and a Yelid Bayis who has a bris on the 1st day. And there's a Miknas Kesef where you bought the child, where there's a bris on the 1st day and on the 8th day. Now, why would there be a bris on the 1st day? So if a child converts less than 8 days old, you do the bris right away. There's an instantaneous bris at the moment of conversion. You do not have to wait for the 8th day. The only time you have to wait for the 8th day is if it's similar to a Jew. He's already in your household when he's born. So where do you have these 4 cases? So the Gemara goes through it as follows. The simplest one is that you do where you have a Miknas Kesef, where you bought the child and the bris is right away, and that is if you buy the mother with the child already born. You're buying the child. He's converting to Judaism after his birth, and if he's less than 8 days old, he'll do a bris right away on the spot. Now, if you bought the mother while she was pregnant, and the child was born in your household, so that's still called a Miknas Kesef, because the fetus was existing in the world when you bought it, and therefore it's a child that you bought. So it's still called Miknas Kesef. However, it's very similar to a Jew because it was born in your household, and therefore it would need a bris after 8 days. What's a situation where you could have a Yilid Bayis born in your household that needs a bris after 8 days? That's easy. That's where you bought a woman, and she's a maidservant, and she became pregnant while in your household, and then she gives birth. So that's a regular birth, just like a Jew. She became pregnant as a Jew. She gave birth as a Jew, and therefore the child will need bris after 8 days. The question is, how do you have a situation where it's Yilid Bayis? It's not considered like you bought the child, and yet he needs a bris after 1 day. Normally, the situation where you need a bris after 1 day is where the child himself converted, less than 8 days old, or somebody converted him. But how could you have a situation where he was born into your household as a child, and still needs a bris after 1 day? So Gemara says that there's Rav Chama, and Rav Chama says that the answer to that is that you bought the woman, you bought the maidservant, but you didn't put her in the mikvah to convert her until after she gave birth. Therefore, the child was born before she became chayav in mitzvahs. She was also born before she ever had the status of a full-fledged Jew, and therefore she never had the tumas yoledes. At the time that she gave birth, she hadn't been to the mikveh yet. Therefore, she never had a tumas yoledes. She still held the status of a guy at the time. Therefore, the child, even though he's yilid bayis because she became pregnant in your household, even though the child is yilid bayis, still he would only need a bris after 1 day, and this must be in accordance with Rav Asi's opinion that where there's no tumas yoledes, the bris is after 1 day, and you do not have to wait for the 8th day to get the bris to happen. Now, that is the opinion of Rav Chama, who says that going to the mikveh later makes a difference. However, according to the Tanna Kama, going to the mikveh much later would not make a difference. It would still need a bris after 8 days only. So obviously, that opinion, that Tanna Kama, argues on Rav Chama, and he also argues on Rav Asi, because he says that the fact that she didn't have tumas yoledes does not affect the timing of the bris. So the Gemara agrees with this, and it's conclusive. The Gemara just wonders, Rava asks, so what is the case of the yilid bayis who needs a bris after 1 day, according to the Tanna Kama? If he doesn't hold of Rav Chama's explanation, so what explanation is there? Well, why would a child who's born in your household already as a Jew only require a bris whenever, and not 8 days specifically? The Gemara quotes Rav Yirmiyah, who says that the solution is that it's a case where you didn't buy the mother, you bought the right to the mother's children. Meaning, one Jew owns the mother, she's a full-fledged maidservant, and she has the status of a Jew, and then you buy from him the rights to the children. That means that the child is called Yilid Bayis, because his mother was a Jew already long before he was ever conceived, but he's owned by somebody who doesn't own the mother. Therefore, he's not like a Jewish situation. It's not like a regular full-fledged Jew situation. He's not like you do with your own kids, because his mother belongs to someone else, and therefore you would not do a bris milah on the 8th day specifically. You would do it right away on the 1st day. The Gemara says that works according to the opinion that you can buy something, that you can buy the fruits of a tree. According to the opinion, you can't buy fruits of a tree. You can only buy the tree itself, and if you buy the fruits of the tree, you end up owning the entire tree. That would mean that if you buy the child, you end up owning the mother. You can't do one without the other. So this explanation would not work. The Gemara says that the explanation then must be like Rav Misharshi says, it's where you buy a shefcha, you buy a maidservant, and your approach is that you're not going to put her in the mikveh at all. You're not going to ever convert her. She's going to stay unconverted, and therefore the child would convert when he's born, and he would be yilid bayis because his mother belonged to you long before he was ever conceived. However, he would not need a bris milah specifically on the 8th day. He would need it right away as soon as he was born.